Gurmagut, Taoireachtas, you were well aware a few months ago in the end of January there was a devastating storm in the West, the Midlands and the Northwest. In fairness, Deputy Cleary and Deputy Healy-Rae are well familiar with the devastation that has been caused. But 4 months later, and I know Minister O'Donovan has had meetings with the different communications outfits, we are seeing in parts of Roscommon and East Galway the likes of Craig's. I sent you a photo this morning of Craig's, where there's a six line for communications for phones. The local people had to get a ratchet strap and tie the pole back. And it broke and they went and had to do it again. And since 4 months ago this happened, and the pole is still thrown there. Areas like Clonfad, Ballymo, a whole number of areas are left devastated without phone lines. And it's not about the phone line, because in some cases they have gone back and they have repaired the broadband. But the phone line is a lifeline to the elderly people for when you need to basically have your panic button. And I would ask you and your government, and I know your minister had meetings with them, I acknowledge that, I would ask you and your government to put the pressure on, and I would also look that the communications regulator would start taking the finger out to the likes of Ayr, because they should be ashamed of themselves around this country the way they have treated the people that has been affected in that area. And following on from that, and I know that there's two ministers here in agriculture, in Clonbanov and Carabehy area, Coney Island area, Gortigani, over the last few weeks there has been a huge amount of forestry burned. And I would ask your government, and I know Deputy Healy-Rae has talked about a reconstitution grant for the windblown timber. An awful lot of people had timber over the last few weeks burned. All you can do is basically cut it down now because it's smothered after the fires. I would ask you that when you're bringing in the reconstitution grant for those people that has been affected in the last few months, that your government would help those people, because after 20 years you know there's no insurance on most of it. This has been devastating in that area, and I would ask you to consider under the reconstitution, it's only a small token of help, because they have lost everything. Whatever about the people in the windblown timber, at least they can try and cut it now and try and get it to sawmills. But where it has got burdened, it's destroyed. You bring in a wood chipper, and whatever is there, you try and chip it up. But they have lost everything. And I would ask you that in the coming months, when you're doing the reconstitution grants, would you consider those people to try and include them along with the windblown people, or the windblown timber as well? But those are the two items, Taoireachtas, that I would ask you that your government would address. Thank you.
Thank Deputy Fitzmaurice for raising this important issue, and in fairness to him, I want to thank him for raising it consistently in terms of the aftermath of Storm Éowyn and the impact that it's had on people across our country, but most particularly perhaps the very long and elongated impact that it has had on people living in rural or more dispersed communities, many of which I know he represents in his constituency and in and around that as well. So let me take firstly the issue in relation to Ayr. And I agree with you, by the way. I don't want to say anything that cuts across the regulator, but they really need to step up here, Ayr, in terms of how they've dealt with customers. I've heard this in countless locations right across our country. So the factual position is Ayr have informed the telecommunications regulator Comreg that all storm-related repairs for the remaining affected customers will be completed by the 3rd of June, which is next week. Now this apparently excludes 11 cases where there's a third-party constraint like access rights outside of Ayr's control. So everything within their control, they're telling government, will be completed by the 3rd of June. Comreg are monitoring the restoration work until it's completed. Now, government is continuing to ensure that the resilience of the communications network and the capacity to quickly restore services in the aftermath of events such as Storm Éowyn is improved. It clearly obviously needs to improve. As you referenced, Minister O'Donovan and Minister Cleary are engaging intensively on this, and there was a meeting of what we call the Mobile Phone and Broadband Task Force last week, convened by the two ministers. The task force meeting was attended by all mobile and fixed network operators affected by Storm Éowyn. Also, Comreg, representatives of the local authorities and the ESB networks were in attendance. A key focus of the meeting was issues around network resilience and service restoration, with a view to having a firm action plan in place before the next winter to reduce the impacts that were experienced in the aftermath of Storm Éowyn. You can can be sure, and knowing the Minister, I think you can be particularly sure that Minister O'Donovan at the meeting expressed his frustration regarding Air's inability to not having restored services to all customers nearly 18 weeks later. I mean, it's farcical. 18 weeks later. Minister O'Donovan has also held meetings with individual operators to address network resilience concerns. He met Vodafone, for example, last week, and he'll shortly meet with both the CEO and the owner of Air. Now, Comreg is the independent regulator, statutorily independent, and it's currently reviewing the performance of operators with regard to service restoration in the aftermath of the storm. They're also conducting a review of the applicable regulations to ensure that they're fit for purpose. And it's a matter for them then to decide whether any action needs to be taken against operators, and Comreg will send a report of this review to the Minister. So there's a couple of things: looking at the performance of operators in relation to this storm, and is there action needed by the regulator? Looking at the regulations, and do they need to be strengthened? And then from a government and operator point of view, working together, what more do we need to do in terms of resilience for future storms? On the broader issue that you've raised in relation to, and thank you for the photographs you sent to my office this morning as well in relation to this, but the other issues that you've raised in relation to forestry and timber, and considering changes to the various schemes, obviously both Minister Hayden and Minister Healy-Rae are here today, and they will have heard you in relation to that, I'm sure will reflect on the constructive suggestions you're making.
Thanks, Taoiseach, for your reply. I think, and I know a small bit about civil's work, it'll be a miracle. The photo I took was taken this morning, and if they're going to have all the infrastructure in place by the 3rd and Monday bank holiday, I'll be amazed. But I hope you're right, and I hope what they have said to you is correct. But I don't think it's going to come true. I would ask your government to keep the pressure on that, because this is a lot of the people that are waiting on those phone lines. For many of them, it's their only contact with the outside world, and especially the panic button is of huge importance to them. In relation to the fires that broke out in that area, I would just ask your government once again, the reconstitution grant, they need help, those people. Whatever, and in fairness to the two ministers, they have met forestry people, and you have gone out to sites where there has been wind-blown timber. This is a different scenario, and if you were available, I would ask you to come down and look at it in that area where, in my opinion, probably recklessness by someone passing a road set a fire going, and the fire basically burned a heap of forestry on people. And you know as well as I know that after 20 years it's not insured, and these people are left high and dry. You can wood chip it, that's all they've left. So they need help for the replanting of that and the reconstitution. I know Minister Healy-Rae spoke about that for the wind-blown timber. I would ask you to include those people in that, to give them, a small token of help. Thank you very much.
No, thanks very much, Les Concordia. Thank you, Deputy Fitzmaurice. So on the two issues, firstly, we will keep the pressure on in relation to those that don't have service. And I think the second point you make is one of the real learnings of the storm, isn't it? That actually when the network goes down, it's not just the loss, and I don't mean to be flippant about just the loss, but it's not just the loss of the phone, it's actually just the loss of all contact and connection with the outside world, and particularly for older people or vulnerable people or rurally isolated people, the impact of that, the stress, the mental health impact, the worry, and for their families, and going on 18 weeks later is a cause of significant concern. So Comreg as the regulator, Minister O'Donovan as the Minister, will continue to intensively monitor this until it's fully resolved, and then, as I say, do that broader piece of work around what needs to change, if anything, from a regulatory point of view, and definitely changing from a building up resilience point of view. In relation to the point you make about the reconstitution grant, and the difference between the issue you're raising and the windblown timber, as you've rightly said, Minister Healy-Rae, Minister Hayden are here today as the ministers with responsibility, and they will engage with you and keep in touch with you on that.
Thank you, Taoiseach.